Klasky Csupo is an animation company that I have a lot of respect and admiration for. They're responsible for some of my all-time favorite Nicktoons, and I'll always be thankful to them for that. Their shows in the 90s and 2000s were era-defining to say the least. We would see them dropping truly iconic cartoons such as the Wild Thorberrys, Rocket Power, and, of course, Rugrats, just to name a few. Interestingly enough, Klasky Csupo also worked on the first 4 seasons of The Simpsons as well, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. They've done work on numerous movies, live-action shows, commercials, and even on Cartoon Network and Disney programs as well. Fun fact, they even produced music videos for the Beastie Boys and Luther Vandross. Their involvement in these projects is kind of all over the board. Sometimes they animate, sometimes they do audio, sometimes they just do the title sequence or some bumpers. Other times, of course, they're in charge of the whole project, which is how we ended up with The Wacky Adventures of Ronald McDonald on VHS, only for purchase at McDonald's for a limited time with a small vanilla ice cream cone or a small Diet Coke back in the late 90s and early 2000s. But I digress. Looking through the back catalog of Klasky Csupo productions, specifically on Nickelodeon back in the day, they just make sense in one way or another. Rugrats, All Real Monsters, The Wild Thornberrys, Rocket Power, All Grown Up, all definitely had a different kind of feel to them individually, but as a collective, they all felt like Klasky Csupo shows in a similar way. Obviously, the art style and animation being a key component to that, but furthermore, they were all more on the happy-go-lucky side, with the premise of the show being rooted in comedy. Each had its own spin, of course, but it was like you could feel the connection between those shows. But there is one Klasky Csupo produced Nicktoon that, in my opinion, really sticks out when compared to the rest. It's a show that definitely had the comedy aspect to it, but they crammed in a big portion of drama and turned this cartoon into a dramedy, which was just really out of the norm for Klasky Csupo cartoons. It felt kinda like when the Amanda Show put out Moody's Point. It was kind of a feeling like those kids shows we grew up watching were growing up with us and morphing into more dramatic, partially serious, teenager-oriented shows, which is exactly what was happening. In this case, we're talking about none other than As Told by Ginger.
Someone once told me the grass is much greener on the other side.
It's really interesting to dive into the history of this show. Honestly, there is so much to cover this one. I really want to, but sometime in the future I plan on doing a long-form video on the show, diving into the details of its history and some of the best episodes, but today, I feel like there's one specific episode that I really need to cover, and that we really need to have a discussion about it. The beauty of a show like this, that was geared towards teenagers and preteens, is that it afforded them the opportunity to address more serious and adult topics. Case in point, the episode we're looking at today, which covers topics such as mental health, depression, mysterious disappearances, and falling in love. It's an episode that has truly stuck with me after all these years. Not gonna lie, when I was a kid, I had mixed feelings on this show. It wasn't my favorite, but I would watch it all the time. There's few episodes that I can actually recall off the top of my head, but this episode is always the first one that comes to mind when I think of this show. That's why today, on our nostalgic walk down memory lane, we're gonna look at the episode of As Told by Ginger called And Then She Was Gone. This episode from Season 2 starts out with a shot of a crow flying above a slightly snowy mountain town on a gloomy day. The crow flies by a sad-looking woman in a white dress who's walking down the street. The crow continues on after flying over Lucky Junior High, where we see Ginger in class.
Mateo smiled at his reflection and seized a brand new day, for no matter what would happen next, his dragons had been slain. And that was written by a 14-year-old, last year's winner of the Emerging Author Award.
Ms. Zorski, can you go over the rules again for this year's competition?
Entry applications are right here on my desk for those of you who are interested. And remember, the winners get to have their work published.
Hey!
Ginger grabs one of the sign-up sheets and goes on walking through the halls with her best friends Macy and Dodie. As she reads the sheet, she's shocked to learn that the deadline is the end of this week.
Relax, Ginger. You work well under pressure.
Then don't relax.
What are you going to write? Well, maybe it should be about me. Remember the time I slipped and fell during an ice dancing performance and needed stitches in my chin?
Thanks, Dodie, but I think it's supposed to be fiction.
Well, you can just make something up that goes at the end. Like, maybe I learned to fly.
Not bad, Bishop. Not bad at all.
Ginger thanks them for their input, but says kindly that she thinks she's gonna do what she usually does. Just sit down, clear her mind, and wait for the story to come to her. Ginger's friends walk away in doubt as she walks right out of the school. Meanwhile, we cut over to Ginger's brother Carl and Dodie's brother Hoodsy as they are admiring an ad for some vanishing powder that they're seeing in the window of a magic shop. The two walk inside, and Carl tries his best to strike up a deal with the rather abrasive shopkeeper.
Thing of it is, I find I only have enough coinage for the vanishing powder and not for the reversal potion, which I see is sold separately. Buying just the powder without the potion would be a tad irresponsible, don't you think?
Looks like Louie couldn't give a rat's hiney, huh, Carl?
I'll take the vanishing powder, please. No bag, just a receipt.
We then cut on over to Ginger, who's at home firing up her tea kettle on the stove. She walks over to the kitchen table and sits down in front of her typewriter. She puts her fingers right on the keys, and her exact words are, "Talk to me. I'm listening."
She chose to walk alone, though others wondered why. Refused to look before her, kept eyes cast upwards, towards the sky. She didn't have companions, no need for earthly things, only wanted freedom from what she felt were puppet strings. She longed to be a bird, that she might fly away. She pitied every blade of grass, for planted they would stay.
In a very symbolic scene, we see the girl run ahead as a crack appears in the ground in front of her. As steam begins to come out of the crack, we cut to Ginger, who's interrupted by the roaring scream of her tea kettle. She continues her story verbally.
She longed to be a flame that brightly danced alone. Felt jealous of the steam that made the air its only home. Well, what do you think so far? And you can be honest.
I think you might want to be careful about who you let catch you talking to major household appliances. But don't worry, your secret's safe with us. Ain't that right, Cooley?
We cut over to Carl and Hoodsy in Carl's doghouse. As Carl holds the vanishing powder, the two contemplate who to use it on. Carl says that they need to try it on someone who's a complete non-presence and that no one would miss. He wants to use it on someone who is, in his eyes, expendable. Carl stresses that if they choose the wrong person, then they could undo life as they know it, citing that they want to keep Blake Grippling around so they have someone to terrorize, and that they want to keep Brandon Higsby around so that they have someone to make fun of all the time.
Reagan Eust?
Class brain.
Heather Farnes?
Class kiss up.
Max Montgomery?
Class obsessive compulsive hand washer. Come on, Hood, you're gonna have to dig a little deeper in the crates here. Look beyond the obvious. I'm talking living, breathing wallpaper.
Bingo!
Now, I already told you Grippling isn't a candidate.
Who's talking about Grippling? I'm talking Sussman. Noel Sussman.
Who?
We cut back on over to Ginger, who's in her room working on her story with a freshly brewed cup of tea.
Some say she wished too hard, some say she wished too long, but we awoke one autumn day to find that she was gone. I think this might actually be good.
We cut over to school the next day, where we see Noelle Sussman practicing martial arts in the hallway as Carl and Hoodsy walk by her, bumping into her in the process. They go to the classroom and Carl frantically covers Noelle's seat in the vanishing powder, noting that the box says that the subject will vanish within 24 hours. The bell rings and we see the class take their seats, including Noelle, who comes into direct contact with the vanishing powder. The teacher starts talking to everyone as Carl and Hoodsy are watching Noelle.
What's she doing, Carl?
If I'm not mistaken, I think she's making fun of us.
Is that thumb finger supposed to be me, Carl?
Yep.
She's funny, Carl.
We cut over to Ginger, who's having her teacher read her poem that she wrote for the contest. She asks her teacher to be brutally honest, and the teacher tells Ginger to take a seat, which immediately breaks Ginger's spirit.
You don't like it.
It's not that, Ginger. It's not that at all. It's very well written.
But
It's a little troubling.
I know. Isn't it sad? I mean, my eyes were practically welling up with tears when I wrote it. It's as if she was someone I knew. I mean, Miss Zorsky?
Ginger, I want to show this to Dr. Leventhal, the school psychologist.
Why?
Just to get her thoughts.
The teacher tells Ginger that there are very heavy feelings in this poem that should really be discussed. Ginger is really confused considering that this writing is a work of fiction in her eyes.
I don't understand. What did I do wrong?
You didn't do anything wrong.
Am I still allowed to enter the competition?
Of course you are, Ginger. See Dr. Leventhal first thing in the morning, and let me know how it goes, okay?
How is it possible to go from feeling so good to feeling so bad?
We cut on over to lunchtime, where we see Noelle Sussman playing with her food like it's a spaceship. Meanwhile, across the lunchroom, Hoodsy and Carl are watching her, one of them seemingly more closely than the other.
She's really weird.
No kidding.
How did I not notice this? How, Hoods? Maybe it won't work. I never thought I would say this, but I hope that Louie really did scam us this time. Because I have a sinking feeling that Noelle Sussman is anything but expendable.
We cut over to Ginger, who's eating lunch with her friends as they blatantly notice that she's really down in the dumps. They try to get her to talk to them about it, but she's reluctant at first. She breaks down the walls and tells them that it's about the poem that she wrote. She explains that she poured her heart and soul into a poem that would be moving, but now her teacher wants her to see the school psychologist as a result. Ginger says that she feels like she's being treated like a head case. Dodie tells her that she doesn't really understand and asks if maybe they can hear the story.
The trees, they say, stood witness. The sky refused to tell. But someone who had seen it said the story played out well. She spread her arms out wide, breathed in the break of dawn. She just let go of all she held, and then she was gone.
We cut back to the lunchroom where we see Courtney and Miranda standing behind Ginger. Ginger looks up to realize that she's surrounded by all of her peers who are listening to the story. Miranda starts talking about how she had no idea that Ginger was clinically depressed, and that if she had known, maybe she would have gone lighter on her. Miranda goes as far as mockingly saying that there are days that she wishes Ginger would disappear, but she had no idea that Ginger felt the same way too. Ginger tries to argue, saying that this poem isn't about her and that it's not a reflection of her actual feelings, but no one believes her.
You guys believe me, right? The poem is just a poem. I wrote it for the contest.
Sure, Ginger. You betcha. Only, if you ever did want to go away, like the girl in your story, we just hope that you tell us. BFFs, you know?
You guys, I am not. I repeat, I am not depressed.
We cut over to Ginger and Carl at home as they're both apathetically laying around in silence. Their mom comes home from work with a bag of groceries and notices that they're both upset. She jokingly says that if one of them doesn't say something, she's gonna call a parental help hotline, to which Ginger responds rather aggressively by questioning the alarmist attitude and asking why a kid can't lay on the couch apathetically without it being a national emergency.
Ginge?
I'm sorry, it's just that everyone at school is making this really big deal about something that isn't a big deal, and now Zorsky wants me to see the school psychologist, and all my friends are treating me like I'm nuts.
Dr. Leventhal, huh? Well, if Zorsky thinks so.
But I don't want to see a psychiatrist. I'm not crazy.
Crazy? Crazy? Crazy is spending 4 months of allowance to get rid of something that you actually really like. That, my friend, is crazy.
Later on that night, we see Ginger's mom getting ready for bed as Ginger slips her poem under her door for her mother to read. Immediately we cut to the next day where Ginger is talking to the school psychologist who compliments her on her writing. She asks Ginger to acknowledge the fact that her protagonist of the story is rather morose, which Ginger accepts. The psychologist explains that that's why they asked her to come here. Their concern is that those feelings are coming from somewhere inside of her.
Are there times that you wish you could disappear?
Does right now count? Guess that wasn't the answer you were looking for.
We cut over to Ginger, who approaches her locker to find herself singled out, as there's a flyer on her locker for a quote, 7th period rap group for girls like you. Just then, we hear a huge sigh and pan over to see Courtney, who's dressed in black with black makeup and black hair.
Things have been really hard for me too lately.
You gotta be kidding.
Oh, you didn't think I was just going to sit back and let you corner the problem child market, did you? Well, did you? Being miserable earned you scads of extra attention, and who doesn't need scads of extra attention, Ginger?
I'm not miserable, Courtney.
Course not. Not with all that extra attention.
I don't want any extra attention.
Oh, stop yelling at me. I told you I'm in a fragile emotional space right now.
As Ginger is fully convinced that everyone has lost it, yet they all think she's the one who has something wrong with her, we cut on over to Carl and Hoodsy, who are in the library, as Carl is mourning the loss of Noelle. Hoodsy offers to help Carl feel a little better by reading to him from his favorite reference book titled Entertaining Penguins. However, when Hoodsy looks for the book, he's shocked to find that it's no longer on the shelf at the library.
Entertaining penguins! It's not on the shelf! Well, let's just see here. The book was last checked out by Noelle Sussman. In fact, it's due back today. She was a fan of Entertaining Penguins, the most absurd reference book of all time. This just can't be happening.
But it is. You vanished your favorite book right along with her.
Who cares about the book, Hoods? Don't you see? She was like my soulmate.
Carl runs out of the library, and we cut right over to nighttime, where him and Hoodsy are in the doghouse gathering all of the info that they were able to gather on Noelle, including transcripts, photographs, and even a possible urine sample. They review everything, noting her being born in Portugal, her advertence to veal, and her obsession with black holes. Carl learns that she was held back in kindergarten for non-compliance when she refused to lay down at nap time. At this point, he decides that he's willing to do whatever it takes to get her back. However, the only idea they have is to buy the reversal potion from the magic shop, which is no longer on discount and jacked up to full price. Carl decides that he's just going to sell something of his that has a high value, as he goes for his prized eyeball in a jar. Hoodsy tries his best to stop Carl, saying that she's gone and that there's nothing they can do, but his words fall on deaf ears as we see Carl reaching for his walkie-talkie to radio Blake Gripling to try and sell him the eyeball, noting that he is the most motivated buyer that he knows. Meanwhile, Ginger is in the kitchen looking through the fridge as her mom walks up to do some dishes.
Ginge, I know you don't want to talk about it, but I just wanted to tell you that I really loved your poem. It gave me the full-blown chills, and I mean it. Way to go, kid.
But, Mom, aren't you worried that I'm the girl in the story? Tragically depressed and crying out for help?
No. I know exactly who you are. You're a bright, sensitive young woman. The kind of person who understands people's feelings. Which is why you can write about them so beautifully.
You always make me feel better, Mom.
Her mother tells her word for word, you don't have to be afraid of your feelings. Ever. No matter what they are, and no one knows you better than you know yourself. So don't let people try to convince you that you're someone you're not, even if they do have a PhD. Her mom tells her that if she doesn't want to talk to Dr. Leventhal anymore, she doesn't have to, but she can always talk to Dr. Mom.
Thanks again, Mom, for making me feel normal.
The potion! The potion! My eyeball for the potion!
Carl, I beg you reconsider.
The next day at school, we cut to Ginger walking into the 7th period rap group, which consists of the school psychologist and a few other girls, including Courtney, who's just sobbing her eyes out, telling a story about how someone used her styling products without asking first.
Courtney,
Yes?
as heart-wrenching as this story is, maybe we could discuss something else. Like, perhaps, your perpetual need to be the center of attention?
We then cut right over to Carl and Hoodsy's class, where the teacher is mid-teaching. Just then, Carl walks in the door, immediately ignoring everyone else, and he starts pouring the reversal potion on the ground near Noelle's desk.
I'm sorry for everything. This is all my fault.
Of course it is. You're the one dumping a sticky mess on my classroom floor.
I'm talking about the disappearance of Noelle Sussman.
Keep quiet, Carl. You're selling yourself up the river.
I vanished the most extraordinary girl to ever stroll the Lucky Elementary corridors.
What on earth are you talking about? You didn't vanish anyone. The Sussman family moved across town. Noelle was transferred to Happy Flower Elementary.
With that info, Carl runs right out of class and right over to Happy Flower Elementary. He comes upon Noelle sitting by herself, reading entertaining penguins out loud. Carl walks up behind her and finishes the sentence she was reading based off of his memory of the book. Noelle smiles big and says hello to him.
You didn't actually think you were going to make off with that library book, did you?
Carl?
Thinking what my voice would sound like if we were underwater.
Where have you been all my life?
Later that night, we see Ginger laying in bed, writing in her diary as she reflects on the day that she had. She states that group therapy wasn't that bad at all, and that talking about feelings was a great way to pass the time. She then reflects on her poem, thinking that maybe it struck a nerve because everyone was able to relate to the main character, including Ginger herself.
'Cause maybe us writers do put a little of ourselves onto every page. And maybe I didn't write that story just for the contest. Maybe I had something to say. Somehow, in writing that poem, I got a chance to know myself a little better. To see myself a little more clearly. And I kind of like what I saw. So, even if I don't get published, I guess in some ways, I already feel like I won.
This episode comes to an end as we see a printing press in motion as it creates a hardback copy of And She Was Gone by Ginger Foutley. Really quickly, I just want to put a big disclaimer on the remainder of this video. As is the same with how all of my videos go, the remainder is going to be my reflection on the episode that we just consumed. I feel the need to give a disclaimer due to the fact that my perception of events and my reflection might be different from yours, and that's okay. I'm also just gonna come out and say it. I've been really struggling with my mental health recently. I know it's related to my job. Working as a 911 dispatcher for these last few years has taken a massive toll on my mental health, and it feels like every shift that passes it just kind of gets worse, but thankfully I'm doing my best to get on the path of retiring from 911 in the future at some point so I can focus on YouTube full time. Ultimately though, what Ginger said in the end of this episode really summed things up well in my opinion. Everyone could relate to the main character in some way, and honestly, that is probably why it struck such a nerve in so many people. We all have mental health. Whether you're struggling or if you're not, the fact of the matter is we as cognizant beings with functioning brains all have mental health. And our mental health is something that we should always take seriously. I gotta say though, Ginger's sentiment at the end, feeling like she's already won because of the knowledge that she's gained from the experience, is a sentence worth 1,000 words. Throughout the roller coaster of emotions that she's gone through and having to go through everyone treating her differently as a result of the poem, Ginger still feels like she came out on top due to how much she learned about herself in the process. And that is something that's so valuable and something that I can relate to more than I care to admit to you guys. Though we do need to acknowledge the fact that Ginger didn't initially believe that she was conveying her own feelings in the poem, the process of actively and knowingly discussing your feelings is a really hard thing to do. First of all, working through your feelings and being open, honest, and vulnerable with another person is a really, really tough thing to do mentally. But also, dealing with the potential aftermath of that can be a whole other battle depending on the circumstance. In Ginger's case, everyone perceived her poem as having a deeper meaning, with direct correlation to her own mental health, and as a result, people started treating her different. I've been through similar myself, and I've gotta say it really sucks. I've, in the past and fairly recently, been in situations where I've opened up about my own mental health struggles and have ultimately ended up with people around me treating me differently, and that hurts. It's really not a fun position to be in. As it pertains to Ginger though, things actually got really gross in that regard. Specifically in reference to Miranda, Courtney's best friend, who bullies Ginger due to the fact that Courtney is mildly infatuated with her for her quote-unquote Gingerisms. The way Miranda treated Ginger was just disgusting. Granted, Ginger stated that she wasn't depressed and didn't want to disappear, but regardless of that, the things Miranda was saying to Ginger are things that you just don't say to someone. All of it was just awful, but hearing Miranda laugh about how sometimes she wishes Ginger was gone and that she didn't know Ginger felt that way too just made me sick to my stomach. If Ginger really had been struggling mentally, then there's a chance that this could have been the straw that broke the camel's back, and Miranda could be morally responsible if anything bad were to have happened to Ginger as a result of her words. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, I haven't watched this show in many, many years, but this episode made me remember just how much I always hated Miranda as a kid. She was always one of the most mean and spitfire bullies on Nickelodeon back in the day, and I just can't stand her. But on that same note, we have to talk about Courtney. I dislike Miranda a whole lot more, but I still cannot stand Courtney for the most part. She is so incredibly self-absorbed that it is just disgusting. This girl literally saw that Ginger was getting attention because people thought she was depressed, so what does she do? Show up to school literally the next day with a completely altered appearance, trying to put on the front that she is struggling mentally as well. This made me lose literally the tiny shred of respect that I had left for Courtney. That's just an abhorrently disgraceful thing to do, and the way that she just blatantly told Ginger that she's not going to sit back and let her corner the problem child market, there's just so much wrong here. First of all, just because someone is struggling mentally, no matter what that looks like, it doesn't by default make them a quote-unquote problem child. Furthermore, the fact that Courtney would just assume that Ginger is doing all of this for attention is just despicable. Courtney is so hyper-fixated on her own pursuit of attention that she sees all of this as a giant competition, and that makes her assume that everyone else has the same mindset. It honestly feels like she can't even acknowledge the fact that the other people go through actual problems because the biggest thing in her life is attention from others, and that's just abhorrent. I gotta give a tiny bit of praise to the school psychologist, literally just for that one scene where they're in the 7th period rap group. We see Courtney just crying her eyes out about some trivial nonsense in an effort to get more attention, which was blatantly obvious to the psychologist, as evidenced by the way that she says that maybe they could discuss her perpetual need to be the center of attention instead. The way that the psychologist straight up called Courtney out was just savage. She could easily see through the ruse that Courtney was putting on, and I love the fact that she called her out on it. However, that was really the only beneficial thing the psychologist did in my personal opinion. The few minutes of therapy session that we saw between Ginger and her directly didn't seem all too productive, which is understandable. Therapy can be uncomfortable at first, and building that rapport with your therapist definitely takes time. However, you could tell how blatantly uncomfortable Ginger was throughout the portion that we saw. Furthermore, I really didn't like the way that the flyer for the 7th period rap group was left on Ginger's locker. The school psychologist is the one who put that group together, so I assume she's the one who put the flyer there. She could have easily told Ginger about it and given her the flyer in person instead during their session. She didn't have to single Ginger out and put that flyer on her locker for every other student to see. On top of that, one thing that bothered me is the fact that this group for sharing your feelings and discussing your struggles is directed at girls only. This drives me just nuts. Boys have feelings too, and it's stuff like this that contributes to toxic masculinity and boys growing up to be brick walls who are completely out of touch with their emotions. Trust me, I used to be that guy, and it's not a pretty spot to be in. It feels bad to have to act like a brick wall and swallow your feelings all the time instead of addressing them head on. Pivoting away from that though, negative aspects aside, the Ginger arc of this episode was a beautiful journey. We see her inspired and writing this poem, then confused and surprised by people's reactions to it. We see her going through one-on-one and group therapy. Then finally, at the end, we see her come to the realization that maybe her writing that poem wasn't about the contest, and maybe that she actually had something to say. It was a really heartwarming journey for me personally, and it made me happy to see Ginger come to that realization in the end. The thing is, this, in my opinion, wasn't a cry for help at all. When Ginger says that she had something to say, that's not her saying, maybe I wrote that poem because I need help. In my eyes, that's her coming to the realization that she does have a lot of feelings inside, and that's okay. And that writing is a very healthy outlet for her to let those feelings out. This is something that I personally can really relate close to. I was today years old when I realized why so many of my videos are about the dark, morbid, or sad sides of these cartoons. Pouring my heart and soul into these videos is really therapeutic for me, and it helps me process some of the things that I've been through, and especially some of the 911 calls that I've had to take over the years. I look back at the tears I cried while working on my Dark Side of Hey Arnold video about Helga, and I look back at the tears that I cried while working on this video, and now I realize just how obvious it should have been to me, but I will admit, I tend to be kind of slow to connect the dots, so it is what it is. Now, moving on from there, I've definitely got to touch on Carl's arc of the story, which, much like Ginger's, was a very beautiful journey, but in a different way. I gotta say, I really don't like how it started out, if I'm being honest. It was kind of scummy to hear Carl talk about how he wants to make someone that he feels expendable disappear. Like, the complete and utter disregard for others is just completely repugnant, if you ask me. At first, him and Hoodsie saw Noelle as a literal nobody. They thought that they could make her disappear and that nobody would notice a thing. Like, okay, in their immediate environment of peers, yeah, sure, most kids probably wouldn't notice a thing, but surely the staff would notice that all of a sudden this kid is just gone with no warning or reasoning behind why. No explanation from their parents at all, she just stops going to school all of a sudden. The staff, or at minimum her teacher, would have definitely noticed. If not the school, then obviously Noelle's parents would have realized that she was gone and would have gotten the police involved and had her entered as missing. I'm sure there'd be search parties looking around for her and everything. Like, a missing kid is nothing to scoff at. Carl, on the other hand, just acts like he can get rid of someone all willy-nilly and that it'll just fly under the radar because she is expendable in his eyes. I mean, I really don't want to beat a dead horse on this one because it's obvious, but long story short, it's messed up that Carl thinks that he can just decide which people get to exist or not exist. Admittedly, though, we do have to keep in mind that that's kind of part of the basis of Carl's character. He's often portrayed as weird, disturbing, and sometimes crass, so there shouldn't be much surprise that he would behave in such a way. However, it's the fact that he is like that makes this story arc all the more beautiful. This is a really unique episode because this is one of the few times that I, in my very few memories of the show, can recall Carl actually letting down the walls and showing some genuine affection towards another person. It was really different to see him being emotional and semi-openly expressing his feelings towards Noelle. It's one of those where you're so used to seeing this character painted in a specific light, but when that light shifts to a different perspective, we get treated to a new angle of that character's personality that we didn't get to see before. One last really random thing that I need to bring up in regards to this arc is the fact that Carl and Hoodsie were able to get a disturbing amount of info on Noelle. Like, photographs, I can understand. You could probably get them, like, from the school yearbook or something. However, having transcripts, like doctor's records and videos of her was just really weird. Not to mention Hoodsie bringing up that he thinks they might have a urine sample from her. Like, that's just so incredibly obscene to me and invasive. Honestly, I don't even want to know what kind of weird things they had to do to get that specifically. All in all, though, this episode is one that I can say truly stuck with me in the back of my mind all these years, and I'm really glad that it did. There's an important lesson to be learned in this episode. Honestly, more than one. There's a ton of important lessons to be learned in this episode. What's funny is I remember seeing this episode when I was young, but the entire Ginger arc flew right over my head. I was way too young to understand what depression was or even consider mental health. However, I do remember the feelings that I got when seeing that sequence of the woman with the puppet strings attached to her as she traversed the desolate landscape. My young mind could tell that there were some dark implications, but I didn't necessarily understand what they were trying to get at here. Now, looking back at this episode as an adult though, I'm confident that there's a good chance this might remain my all-time favorite episode of As Told by Ginger. I'm a sucker for episodes that truly resonate with me, and honestly, up to this point in my YouTube journey, this might be the one episode that has resonated with me more than any other. But what do you guys think? Do you remember this episode? Was your perception and reflection different than mine? Let me know in the comments down below. I always love seeing your guys' feedback. I want to give a huge thank you to my patrons, especially those in the 90s kids tier. You guys are the absolute best, and you're bringing me one step closer to retiring from 911 and helping my mental health, and I just gotta say thank you from the bottom of my heart. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button and give praise to the YouTube algorithm in hopes that it pushes this video to everyone else. And as always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
Someone once told me the grass is much greener